All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Nathan Smith, and I'm the Digital Programming Coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. And this is Microsoft Excel Part 1, the basics. And I'm so glad you're here. Um, Before we get things rolling, just a few things to mention really quick, kind of housekeeping and sort of just uh, general useful stuff, hopefully. One thing to mention is we just wrapped up yesterday the Six Bridges Book Festival, which was really cool. We had tons of great authors and wonderful discussions. And even though the festival's over, that stuff is still out there for you, at least the vast majority of it. We live streamed and it is recorded. It's available a lot of different places. One of those places is on our YouTube channel. You might be watching this on the YouTube channel right now, or you might be watching it on Facebook, Twitch, wherever the case may be. Wherever it is that you're watching, you can probably see some of the videos there. So take a look. And the most exhaustive collection is on the CALS YouTube channel. That's the easiest way to get there. It's just to head to cals.link/YouTube. Super easy. Also, speaking of little links like that, uh, there's also a little address in the corner of the screen right now. During the class, I'm going to be using an example file, and you can download that example file and follow along if you head to cals.link/Excel files. Grab that example file if you want to follow along. If you'd rather just watch, then that's perfectly fine too. Feel free to just watch, and you can always circle back and rewatch this later on. Again, on the CALS YouTube channel is a really good place to find it. So let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we need to cover. There's lots of other technology classes coming up. This is Excel Part 1. I'm also going to be doing Excel Parts 2 through 4 the next 3 Mondays at 10 o'clock. Hopefully we'll start a little more promptly this time. There were some technical difficulties and little wrinkles today, but generally speaking, we're going to be starting those at 10, so you can come check those out. And that's about it. Let's go ahead and dive into the class. I've downloaded the example file and gotten it pulled up in Excel. Let me switch over and take a look at that. Okay, cool. There we go. Great. So I've got it pulled up, and when you first open it up, you'll probably see something like this with this little yellow band that says Protected View. Be careful. Files from the internet can contain viruses. Unless you need to edit, it's safer to stay in Protected View. I promise you, I have not put any viruses in the file. I'm going to click Enable Editing, and it is safe for you to do so as well. And that should bring up the full set of tools here. By the way, at the little address that's underneath my face, where you're seeing it right now, you'll also be able to download a handout, which is really convenient. The handout is basically going to walk you back through a lot of the material that we're talking about today, most of the material that we're talking about today. So if you want a reminder later on, you are you're welcome to download that, check it out, print it out if you want, and that way you can access that material later on. So, one other thing that I always like to say, it's been a little while with all the festival stuff. I haven't done as many classes lately, but one thing that I always like to say at the beginning of class that I almost forgot to say is, if you have questions, please let me know. Don't worry don't worry about if it feels like, oh, that might be a silly question, that might be too easy, things like that. I'm not at all concerned about that. The point of a technology class is for you to learn useful things about technology. So if you're learning something useful about technology, then class is going great, even if we have to take a little detour to tackle the question that you have. On the other hand, if you're sitting there watching this and you're just kind of a little bit confused and the information is kind of going in one ear and out the other and stuff like that, um, that to me is an unsuccessful technology class, because what I want is for you to learn something useful about technology, and that can't happen if you're too afraid to ask questions and if you don't understand what I'm talking about. So if you have questions, let me know. Here's how you do that. If you're watching on YouTube and you're on your computer, then you'll see over on the right-hand side the live chat box. Type your questions in there. If you're on a mobile device on YouTube, the live chat is going to be down below. You might have to tap something to get it to show up, but it should be pretty clear what it is. It'll say something about live chat. If you are joining me on Facebook, put your questions in the comments on the video, just like you would any other post in all of Facebook. If you are watching on Twitch, use the chat as usual. And well, actually, if you're watching on Twitter, I probably will not see your question. You might hop over to one of those other places, but you can. But if you do that, you can certainly send your questions my way. And of course, you can send me a question by email as well. If you have one, it's nsmith@cals.org. If you circle back later, or if you're watching this later on and you're like, oh, I really want to ask a question, but the class is over, that's totally fine. Okay, so we've got our Excel window pulled up. Let's go ahead and tackle that. Actually, you know what? Let me go ahead and drop this. There we go. Excellent. Okay, great. So now we've got a message in there so that everybody can find the spot to put the questions. Okay, so here we are in our Excel window. What I want to do first is I want to show you around, so that way you get the lay of the land, and you'll be able to find stuff when you need it, hopefully. So let's talk about what all we have here in this Excel window. Up at the very top left, we have what's called the Quick Access Toolbar. And you won't be surprised to learn that the point of the Quick Access Toolbar is to allow you to quickly access tools that you'll probably need to use fairly frequently. So up at the very top left, in most versions of Excel, at least that are up to date, we have this autosave feature right here. It says autosave, and there's a little slider that goes on and off. If you have your Excel file stored in some form of online storage that's offered by Microsoft, so Microsoft OneDrive or Microsoft SharePoint, then Excel can automatically save your work as you go. And that can be really useful, because then you don't have to worry about, Excel accidentally, you accidentally close Excel, or there's a power outage and your desktop computer turns off, or things like that. You don't have to worry about losing your work in those situations. However, it is kind of a double-edged sword. Obviously, if you make a lot of changes and then you go, oh, this was all a mistake, and you want to get it back to the way it was before you started messing with it, one way that I like to do that sometimes is by just closing it out without saving the changes. That's not going to work if autosave is on. So it can be a mixed bag, but you just want to look up here and be aware whether autosave is on or off, and that way you can avoid problems if they crop up. Older versions of Excel, like 2013 and before, do not have this autosave option, but that's okay. We're basically never going to talk about it again. In fact, if you have another version of Excel, I happen to have the newest version of Excel because we use Microsoft Office 365 here at Cal's for staff. So I happen to have the newest version, but if you don't, that's perfectly fine. Almost all the stuff we're going to talk about in this class is applicable back to, I would say, at least Excel 2010. So probably if your version of Excel runs on your current computer, you'll be just fine in this class. And most of the stuff we're going to talk about is applicable even further back than that. But some of the stuff has changed, and I'll try to note that where I can. You might see things that look slightly different, but all in all, the functionality is basically the same. Okay, so that's our autosave feature. We've got next to that the save button. So even if autosave is on and you're like, oh, I definitely need to save my work right now, you can click this. If autosave is off, then you can click that, and it will just if you've already saved your work at least once, it will update the existing file with any changes you've made. If you're just starting out with a brand new file, though, this save button will trigger what we call save as. And the save as feature basically asks you to give your file a name and pick a place for it to live on your computer. So in the documents folder or wherever the case may be. Once you've done that, then next time you click save, it's just going to go, oh, we already have this file. Let's just save whatever changes they've made, and we're good. And you shouldn't even really see anything happen on your computer unless you made a lot of changes that take up a lot of space, or unless your computer's fairly slow. But obviously, particularly if autosave is off, you want to check every so often and save your work. Now, during this class, I'm not really going to be saving my work because we're using these example files, and next time I open the example file, I want it to be the same as at the beginning of that class as it was at the beginning of the previous class. So you might want to do that as well. But obviously, you can always download a fresh copy of the example file if you want to save your work this time and start over. Totally cool either way. But that's the save button. Obviously, it's super important, and particularly if autosave is off, you want to be saving often so that you don't lose your work. Next to that are these two other buttons that are definitely very, very useful. And what these are is they are the undo and redo or repeat buttons. So the undo button, let's start with that. The undo button basically it reverses whatever the last action was that you took. So it's up here at the top. It's kind of grayed out right now, but normally it'll be white, and it'll kind of be a little arrow that's arcing off to the left. So it kind of curves here and goes off to the left. What that does is exactly what it sounds like. Whatever the last action was that you took, it reverses it. It undoes it. So you make a mistake, hit that undo button, it'll go back to the way it was. Really, really handy, obviously, because we're all human and we all make mistakes, right? So the undo button is really useful. In fact, it can undo multiple steps worth of mistakes. So if you made 3 mistakes, click the undo button 3 times, and then you're good to go, pretty much. So the undo button's extremely handy to have because, when you make a mistake, you can correct it with that undo button. You also have next to it the redo button, or sometimes it's the repeat button. So what that button does, it's kind of a mirror image of the undo button. It's an arrow that's kind of arcing off to the right. And that redo or the redo button undoes your undoing. So let's say, okay, I got a little excited and I made 3 mistakes, but in my haste to correct things, I click the undo button 5 times. Well, that's perfectly fine, but it's going to undo some of the work I intended to keep, and that's unfortunate. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that that I keep the work that I did that I want to keep, but that I correct the mistakes that I made. So if I click that undo button 5 times, thankfully I can undo my undoing by clicking the redo button twice. And that way I've corrected the 3 mistakes that I made, but I also, kept all the work that I intended to keep. The redo button is really, really handy. One thing to note about it, though, is it only works as the next action after you undo. So if you make a mistake and you go up to the undo button, click it, um, then make sure you check over your work really quick just to make sure that the only thing that changed was whatever you meant to undo. If you undid some work that you intended to keep, then you can quickly hit that redo button. Or, I mean, it doesn't have to be quick. There's no time limit. But if you hit undo and then you immediately start to make other changes to your Excel file, then you're going to lose that opportunity to use the redo button and and correct whatever the problem was that the undo button caused. So just make sure if you hit undo, particularly if you hit undo a few times, just make sure that you don't that you check over your work really quick. Make sure that you didn't undo anything that you intended not to, and that should hopefully keep you from having problems. If you notice you undid something, just click that redo button really quick, and that way you get back to where you need to be. Finally, when you haven't just hit undo, when you've been making other changes to your file, the redo button is replaced by the repeat button, and the repeat button is actually an arrow that goes in a full circle. And what that does is it redoes repeats whatever the last action was that you took. So if you changed the color of one cell, then you can click in a different cell and hit the repeat button to change the color of it as well. That way you can kind of you can do you can take an action repeatedly without having to dig into a bunch of options and menus and stuff to get to it. So that's handy sometimes as well. Okay, next to that is this little drop-down arrow. If I click on that, there are other actions that I can add to the quick access toolbar, other commands, or I can click more commands here, and almost anything you can do in Excel that's like an option, you can add to the quick access toolbar. So if you find yourself hunting for something a lot, then you can throw it up here on the quick access toolbar, and that way you can get to it without sort of digging. But thankfully, Excel makes it easier to find a lot of your other tools as well, not just the stuff that's here on the quick access toolbar. And I want to show you how that works now. Okay, so down here underneath this green bar at the top is an area that's known as the ribbon. The ribbon is a design concept that Microsoft likes an awful lot. They've added it to pretty much all their software at this point. The way it works, the idea behind it is that it makes the stuff that it makes your commands, your tools in Excel and whatever other programs you're using that have it really easy to find. So, for example, down here, or you'll see at the top, we've got these little tabs here. And then down here, so I've got the home tab selected. You can see that by the little green underline underneath it. And then down here, we have a bunch of essentially the tools that we use most regularly in Excel, or stuff that you want really easy access to. So things like the font and the font size and the colors and changing where text is located inside of a cell and stuff like that. A lot of things that we'll be talking about here in a moment. But that's the home tab. It basically has the tools that you use most frequently. When I click the insert tab, though, then all the options I have under this change, and we're giving a bunch of commands related to, as you might imagine, inserting things into your Excel file. So so if you're like, oh, I need to put this in my file, then then that's inserting something. So it's pretty easy to make the leap. I might need to click the Insert tab to get to that particular option. The Page Layout tab has tools for dealing with the way things are laid out in Excel, particularly for the purposes of printing stuff. It's really useful for that. The Formulas tab contains kind of reference information about formulas. We are going to be talking about formulas toward the end of class today. Formulas look scary, but they're not actually all that bad. And we're going to try a couple of basic ones toward the end of class to dip our toes in the water. But there are these what I call building blocks of formulas called functions, and they're basically tricks that Excel already knows how to do, kind of like your dog knows how to sit, stay, come, roll over, those sorts of things. Excel knows how to do a bunch of tricks too. A lot of them are related to things like math or dealing with text and stuff like that. And so it's not worth memorizing all of those little tricks. Excel has them listed out here in what's called the function library. So that way you can quickly go and be like, oh, I swear there was one where you could calculate an average, and you could come in here and find it pretty quickly and drop it into your formula. So that's really useful. And then there's other stuff for checking errors in formulas and stuff like that. The Data tab, when I click on that, contains tools for managing the information inside your spreadsheets. And we'll talk more about this in part 2 or part 3. I can't remember which off the top of my head, but there's a lot of useful stuff here that we'll definitely dig into. The Review tab contains tools for checking your work, checking things like spelling and accessing the built-in thesaurus and so forth, and also collaboration tools and ways to protect your file from accidental changes, or I guess malicious changes as well. The View tab here gives me options to change how I'm seeing my file without changing the actual content of it. Things like zoom are located here. And then there's 3 tabs here that we're not really going to get into on mine. You may or may not have this. There's the Developer tab, which gives you some advanced options that we're definitely not going to have time to dig into. There's the Help tab here with basic kind of, ways to contact Microsoft or to look up information about using Excel reference information. And then I have an Acrobat tab up here because Adobe Acrobat Pro is installed on my computer. Unless you have Acrobat Pro, you probably won't have that tab. The way I like to think of this ribbon is kind of like a tool chest. So if you think about if you've ever been in a mechanic's shop or a wood shop, somewhere where they use a lot of tools, they've got those big old tool chests with, with a bunch of drawers and maybe even some wheels on the bottom. And the idea behind that is, if you are someone who uses a lot of tools and you have them well organized, then you'll probably have something like a drawer for the screwdrivers, a drawer for the ratchets, a drawer for, the hammers or whatever. And so you can quickly go over to the tool chest, grab, pull out the drawer, grab the tool you need, and get straight back to work, rather than having to dig through a big old pile of tools as you're trying to get stuff done. So that makes things a lot more efficient and a lot less frustrating. The ribbon is kind of the same way. Rather than having, you've got menus up here, and then you've got a toolbar, and maybe you have a toolbar over here, and maybe there's one over here too. Instead, pretty much everything is up here at the top, and it's organized into these nice categories. So it's hopefully relatively easy to find. Finally, there's the File tab over here on the left. If I click on that, it's going to take me to this area called the Backstage. We're not going to spend too much time on this because there's other stuff to get into. But here on the Backstage, we've got the Home tab, or we've got a bunch of options here on the left. So there's this home screen where basically you can choose recent files to open, or files that you've pinned so you can get to them quickly, stuff like that. Or you can choose from different kinds of like templates in order to kind of give yourself a jump start on designing a document rather than designing it completely from scratch. And there are also some in mine, newer versions, there are also some tutorial templates here that that can help kind of walk you through different aspects of using Excel, which is kind of nice. If you click New, then that's going to help you create a new Excel file, so that way you can well, you can start from scratch and keep the information that you've got separate from whatever you've already created. There's Open, so you can open an existing file. Info will give you basic information about your file and help you do things like clear out stuff that you might otherwise or clear out extraneous information or resolve problems that might make it difficult for people with certain types of disabilities to access the information in your workbook, things like that. There's Save and Save As, which we talked about. I have Save as Adobe PDF. Again, that's an Adobe Acrobat Pro thing. You probably won't have that. There's Print, of course. There's Share to send it online in various ways. Export, so you can convert your files into a different format. Publish, which basically is how you save your file as a PDF. Close, which will close the file without closing Excel. So Excel will be open, but the file that you were working on will be closed out. And then Account, to deal with your Microsoft account. Feedback, to contact Microsoft and give them information about problems or ask for help. And then Options, so you can change the settings in Excel. I haven't found myself needing to do that terribly much, so we're not going to really dig much into that. If you want to get out of this Backstage area without making any changes, then you can just click this left arrow up at the top left. Okay. The next thing that we've got here is these two boxes down here right underneath the ribbon area. This box that for me currently says A1 is called the name box. We're not really going to dig into this, but I will point back to it just briefly later on, and we'll talk about it a little more next week in part 2. Up here next to that is what's called the formula bar. The formula bar is really useful for a variety of purposes. Primarily, though, what it's going to do is it's going to show you the information that's stored in a particular cell. And we're going to talk about that, obviously, a ton more as we move forward. But that's the main thing. It shows you what information is stored in a particular cell. Down here underneath that is the actual spreadsheet. Of course, as you probably know, Excel is a spreadsheet program. But I will say just briefly, Excel, while it's a spreadsheet program, an Excel file, if you're being a little more technical, is not called a spreadsheet. It's actually called a workbook. The reason for that is pretty simple. An Excel file can contain multiple spreadsheets, not just one. Kind of like a book can contain multiple pages, not just one. So if you said, if I said, hand me that page, and you handed me an entire novel, that'd be a little weird. Whereas, because a novel contains a lot of different pages with a lot of different content on them. An Excel file is the same way. An Excel workbook can at least contain multiple sheets or spreadsheets with different sets of data on them. And so that's why it's called a workbook. So, but this is one of the two spreadsheets that's in this particular example file. So the first sheet is this sandbox sheet right here. You'll know that it's called that because it says sandbox right there. There's also a basic math sheet. If I come down here and I click on the tab that says basic math, then it's going to switch over and it's going to show me a different set of data here. So that way you can store multiple sets of data in a single file and make it really easy to transport and easy to organize. And that's very convenient. Next to the name of that sheet is this little plus sign right here. That's the new sheet button. If I click on that, lo and behold, creates a new sheet, and it just calls it something basic like sheet 1. If I want to get rid of it, I'll click with the right mouse button, or if you're on a laptop, you can tap with 2 fingers on the little touchpad, and I'll click delete. If there's information in the sheet, then it's going to warn you before you delete the sheet. And the reason for that is, at least in some versions of Excel, once you delete a sheet, you can't get it back. So, well, at least not with undo. The only way to get it back in most versions of Excel is actually to exit Excel without saving whatever changes you've made and then reopen the file. So if your sheet has data on it, you do want to kind of think long and hard about whether or not you want to delete that sheet. But if you're in danger of deleting it permanently and not being able to undo, Excel will warn you about that before you actually make the change. So you'll get one more chance to kind of pause and be like, okay, am I really, really sure? Okay, cool. So let's click back to this sandbox sheet over here. And I'll also point out you have your little scroll bars over here where you can move around. Excel sheets go for thousands and thousands of columns across and thousands of rows down. You can scroll all the way to the end of an Excel sheet, but I do not recommend it. It's not a good use of an afternoon. But you can basically, even though those cells technically exist in a sort of theoretical sense, you can basically just ignore them and work up here at the top left, which is what I recommend you do. But then if you need more space, it's always there for you. So that's really handy. Um, so, so yeah, there are your scroll bars if you want to scroll around. And then down here at the bottom right is this little zoom slider right here. I can slide this up a bit and towards the right, and it's going to zoom in. And that way we can see a little more clearly what's going on here on our sheet as we're working. And of course, you can slide it the other way to zoom back out. Okay, great. So we've got this all. We've talked about sort of the lay of the land. Let's talk about sheets themselves, and let's start putting some data in. Okay, so the first thing we need to know, there's a bug, is how to figure out where we want our, how to figure out where we want our data to be. There's no right or wrong answer necessarily on that. You can lay it out any way you want. There are certain best practices that we'll talk about moving forward. But one thing to know right off the bat is how to figure out where your data is. So this cell is cell A1. You'll notice it says A1 up in the name box, and it's the only cell that's in column A and on row 1. This is basically like Battleship. If you've ever played Battleship, you know what I'm talking about. There's the columns and there's the rows, and you say like, G6 or whatever, and you find out whether you hit their aircraft carrier. Same deal here in Excel. Pretty simple. If I go to G6 in Excel, it's the cell that's in column G and on row 6. Now you can insert and remove rows and columns as you see fit, but the numbers and the letters are going to stay the same. So if I delete column G here, then whatever is in this column is just going to move over, and that stuff is going to be in column G. So, so you'll never run into a situation where you have a sheet that has no row 9 or whatever. That's not going to happen. That also means that there's only one cell that's in a given column and on a given row. So there can never be more than one, F3. There can only be one of those at a time. So that makes that makes this sort of Battleship approach a reliable way to point to a particular cell and talk about what's in there. So we've got our sort of so that's how we figure out which cell is which. Let's see here. Give me just a moment. Let me check on something really quick. All right. Okay, cool. And okay, great. Excellent. So thank you for your patience for a second there. All right. So we talked about how to figure out where data is in a cell. So how do we put something in a cell? That part's pretty easy, thankfully. All we need to do for that is we need to select a cell that we want. And you do that just by clicking on the cell, just once. You don't even have to double click. Or you can move around to and select different cells with the arrow keys on your keyboard. So just those up, down, left, and right keys on the keyboard. Just use those. You can move from cell to cell pretty easily. Once you've got a cell selected and you want to put some data in it, then you just start typing. So I'll type something in. And then to confirm that that's what I want in my cell, I'm just going to press enter. Excuse me. What that'll do is two things. Number one, it confirms what I typed in. And number two, it's going to move me on down to the next row here, row 12, as it turns out, in that same column. I can also, if I start typing something and I realize I made a mistake, to cancel my changes to that cell, I can just press the escape key on my keyboard. So if you look at the top left of your keyboard, there's the escape key. ESC is usually what it says. It might say escape written out, depending on what kind of computer you have. I'll hit that escape key, and that cancels the changes that I was in the midst of making to my cells. Next thing, if I want to put something else, I'll click somewhere else and put some in a different cell. If I want to put something in a different cell and but I don't want to move to the next row, I could also move to another column after I'm done typing. The best way to do that is hit the tab key on the left-hand side of your keyboard. That will confirm what I just typed, and it will move my selection to the next column over. One unusual thing to note is if I select a cell and I type in a number, and then I press enter or tab or whatever, or even click out of the cell, that's fine too. You'll notice that it moves it over to the right-hand side of the cell. This is something that Excel does by default. I'm pretty sure that the main reason for that is just readability, so that you don't have, for instance, so that you don't have text here and then you have a number right here next to it, and it gets confusing whether the number is part of the text or not. I believe that's why they do this, but just know that's going to happen. If you want the numbers to be aligned along the left-hand side, you can do that, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay, so let's see. We also, of course, sometimes you'll type information into a cell and you need to get rid of it. The easiest way to do that is just select the cell. So again, you click with the regular left mouse button, or you use your arrow keys to move to the right spot, and then press delete on your keyboard is the easiest way to do it. So I'll hit delete, and it clears out the cell just like that. Pretty easy. Okay, so we've talked about entering data into our cell. That's fairly straightforward. Oh, sorry, one additional thing to note. If I start typing something in a cell and it's essentially wider than the width of the column that it lives in, Excel behaves in a way that you might not anticipate, and so it's kind of important to know this. So I started in cell H7 here, and I typed, "This text is somewhat longer." You'll notice that the text just continues out to the right of my column here. So the word somewhat is almost all, but not all, in column I here, and the word longer is in column J here. And so I typed it in there, and that works, but it's kind of, well, it's just too wide. So what Excel does is it allows my text to continue on into these other columns. But the important thing to note about this is if I click in column I, you'll notice in column I, my text is, when I click in column I, even though it kind of looks like the word somewhat is in column I here, if you look up in the formula bar, you'll notice there's nothing there, nor is there anything there when I click in cell J7 there. If I click in H7 though, you'll notice it says the whole thing. This text is somewhat longer. So Excel doesn't necessarily have, I think there is a limit, but there's a pretty generous limit when it comes to how much stuff you can store in one cell in an Excel sheet. But obviously there's only a certain amount of visual space. So if you type something like this and there's nothing in these columns next door, then Excel will just let the text run long. And that way you can read the whole text if it's not important to see what's over in these other columns. But if I put something in the other column, you'll notice it just cuts it off. It truncates it right here. So that way, again, you don't get confused as to whether the number is part of the text or not. Or, even if I put some text here, you might get a little confused because, and you might try to read it together as sort of one phrase or one sentence. And Excel doesn't want you to do that. So it's going to cut it off right at that borderline there between the columns. And same if I put something here. And it's still actually a little confusing there, but, Okay, so that's how Excel deals with text that's a little bit longer than the width that you would expect for it. So we've got that situated. Next, what I want to do is I want to show you some of the basic tools up here that we have for changing the look of cells or kind of how text or information is laid out inside of cells. We're not going to spend super duper long on this bit just because there are a lot of tools here that you probably know how to use from other things like email or Microsoft Word. And there's more interesting stuff that's unique to Excel that we definitely want to explore during class. So just know that I'm not necessarily going to dig the deepest possible into some of these next few things in favor of giving you more information that's specifically about the way Excel works and the tools that Excel offers. So, okay, we have up here at the top in this font area of the ribbon. Now, of course, if you don't see these tools, you might need to click the Home tab up here at the top. If you were clicking around to some of the other tabs in the ribbon following along with me earlier, you may want to click that Home tab to get back here. Up at the top in this font area, we have a few things. First of all, we have the font or the typeface, if you want to be a little more nerdy about it. And right now, the font that we're using by default is called Calibri. If I click on this, then it gives me a little drop-down box, and I can select any of the fonts that are installed on my computer. Super easy. And it changes the look of the text. Next to that, we have our font size. Default font size here is 11, so that's the size that we start with. But if I click the drop-down box, again, I can select one of these other sizes if I want to. I can also click in the box here, type in an exact size that I want, and press Enter on my keyboard. So if I want actually size 33, I'm going to click here, type 33, press Enter, and then it makes it just ever so slightly smaller, hardly noticeable, but it did change it a little bit, and and you can change it to any size you want. Next to that, I have I have two buttons here: increase font size and decrease font size. Using those two buttons, I can I can change the font size, and it's basically just going to go through all the different options that are in this drop-down menu and so that you can go one by one and kind of see like, okay, is that the right size? No, it's a little too big. Maybe I'll make it a little smaller, that sort of thing. Underneath that, we have some other text related options here to change the look of our text. So this B makes the text bold. The I will make it italicize it. The U will underline it. And then you can also click the drop down arrow next to the underline button, and you can click on the D for double underline. And there it is. Beautiful. When I do that, you'll notice a couple of things happen. Obviously, the text changes to be double underlined. Great. But also, if I click the drop down arrow, but also you'll notice that the U that used to be here has been replaced by the D with the double underline, which makes the double underline the default. If I click in this cell, then I can come up here, click the D again, and get the double underline for this cell as well. Click it again, removes it right away. So so just be aware that that's the case, and that's kind of handy if you're making a particular formatting change, like underlining. You want to double underline a bunch of stuff. This makes it a little simpler to do that. If I click the U again, then it's going to go back to single underline for this cell, and also it's going to make the single underline the default again. Next to that, we have the borders button, which we'll talk about in a sec, but I don't want to dig into that just yet. And next to that, we also have our color options here. So first of all, I have the little fill color button here, this paint bucket with the yellow color swatch underneath it. If I click on that, then it's just going to fill my cell with yellow. If I click the drop down arrow next to it, then rather than filling the cell with yellow, it's going to give me a big old menu with a bunch of different color options to it. I can click any of these color options that I want, and I can switch over to that color. And again, just like with the underlining, choosing a different color in this menu makes that color the default. So if I wanted to change another cell to have that same green fill color, I just click the cell and then click the paint bucket or the green swatch, and that will do the trick. Super easy. Next to that, we have our text color option, so our font color. Again, if I click the A with the red swatch underneath it, it's going to turn my text red. If I click the drop down arrow and I choose a different color, then I can change the text to be that particular color. I'll go with this dark blue. And then again, that becomes the default font color for this button. So if I click somewhere else, I can change that text to dark blue. Great. So we'll come back to this borders button in a minute, but I want to move on from this area for just a sec and talk about our alignment options here. So the first thing to point out in these alignment options, we've got three different, or we have these 6 buttons right here. Let's actually, I'm going to select this cell right here that says ah. Okay, so using these alignment options, we can change where the cell is, or where the text is inside of, or whatever the data is, if it's just numbers, inside of a cell. By default, since this is text and not a number, it's going to be aligned along the left-hand margin of the cell. And pretty much all information is going to be aligned along the bottom of the cell. So it's going to kind of sit at the bottom there. I mean, it's not completely at the bottom, but it's pretty close in this particular cell. If I wanted to put it at the top instead, I'm going to come up here, and we have this bottom align button that's currently shaded in because the text sits at the bottom by default. But if I click the top align button, then it's going to move my text to the very top of the cell. Regardless of how I size this cell, the text is going to stick at the top there. If I want it in the dead center, vertically speaking, then I'm going to click the middle align button here. And if I want it back at the bottom, I'll click the bottom align. Similarly, down here, we have our horizontal alignment. So left is the default for regular text that's not a number. Center, of course, to put it in the center of the cell, and right, or align right, to put it on the right-hand side of the cell. All that's pretty easy. If I want it in the dead center of the cell, I'm going to choose middle align and center. And there it is. Okay, so one or a couple other things to point out here. Now we do have a, if you wanted to rotate your text in some way, you do have this orientation button. If I click here, I could angle the text either counterclockwise or clockwise. I could do vertical text where it starts at the top and goes down letter by letter. Or I can rotate the text up or down. If I don't want to use any of these options, then I'm gonna just click on the one that's already selected and it will turn it off basically. Next to that, we have wrap text and merge and center. And these are really, really handy. What they're gonna do, if I click here in this cell, of course, the text was too long to fit in this column, as we talked about earlier. But let's say that I don't want to change the width of this column, but I do want to be able to see this whole phrase that I wrote in the cell. What I can do is I can select the cell and I can come up here and click wrap text. And that's going to expand the cell. I'm not sure why it did it this way. Normally what it should do is expand the cell vertically if it needs to, so that it can fit the entire text there. And it'll create multiple lines within the cell so that you can see all the text that's inside the cell without having to change the width of it. That can be really, really useful for if you have a longer sentence that you need to fit in, or, if you are, you've got a list of books that have long titles or things like that. When horizontal space is at a premium, as it sometimes is, you can use this to kind of use your vertical space instead. And that can be really, really helpful. If you want to turn this off, you just select the cell and click wrap text again to turn it right back off. The other option you have up here is merge and center. And this is used more often than not for things like titles. With a title, so let's say that I put, the title up here. Okay, it fits nicely there, but obviously it's tiny, 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 and it's a title, so I want it to be big. So I can make the text bigger. But when I do that, what's going to happen is, it makes the row a lot taller. And if I wanted to make sure that it's sort of centered, then I kind of have a problem here because, I may be shifting my data. I might be making this column narrower. And if so, then it's going to shift this over to the left and things like that. So I don't necessarily want that. I want I want basically the sizes of my things to stay the same, but I want to give plenty of room for this title. So what I can do, I'm going to undo resizing that column there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to select a bunch of these cells, maybe all the way over here, and maybe one more down. So I've got all these cells selected from A1 to J4. The way that I did that, I clicked in cell A1 here, and I dragged until I reached cell J4. And that selected all of these cells at once. So you can select multiple cells at once. It's really, really handy. We'll talk about it a little bit more in just a second. So I've got this selected. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the top and I'm going to click on this button that says Merge and Center. When I do that, it takes all those cells and it forms them into one giant sort of supercell. And so now I can readjust my row height up there on row A1 by dragging this. And I can keep everything the same, but my title is going to be up here. It's going to be nice and centered. It can be even bigger if I want to without disrupting things. And I can adjust all my sort of the widths of my columns and the heights of my rows and all that stuff without having to worry about it messing up the way that my title looks. So so that gives me a lot more flexibility where I can change the sizes of my rows and columns based on my data rather than based on making the title look good. If I wanted to put this on the left-hand side, I can just come up here and click Align Left. And Excel treats this as one cell for almost all purposes. Sometimes if you're doing formulas or something like that, this is not the best. But generally, if you're just doing a little bit of text, this is useful. I could center it vertically. Vertically. And if I want to unmerge these cells, I just click Merge and Center again, and it's going to unmerge them. Now, it is going to leave the text here, and it is going to leave everything sort of formatted the way that it was. So if I click over here and I start putting something in, notice it's still going to give me that huge font size. I'll press Escape to cancel out of that. So you'll need to adjust that again. You might just come over here, select all those cells, and change the font size back to 11 just to get it to get it back the way you want it to be. So let's talk about borders, and then we'll talk about changing our row heights and column widths and selecting multiple cells, because there's a few different ways to do that. I've kind of given you a preview already, but I want to dig into it a little more directly. So up here at the top, I have this this button. Right now, when I hover over it, it says bottom border. And if I click in a cell and I click just that bottom border button, then you'll notice it doesn't look all that different. I just get I get a black underline or border line there instead of the gray ones that I have, the grid lines. If I click here in the drop-down box next to that, I also have, then I get a bunch of additional options. There's the top border button. If I click on that, it also turns on a black top border for this cell. And so on and so forth. There's left border, right border. There's also the no borders button. If I click on that, then it's going to clear out all of those and give me the gray border lines again. I could do all borders. So if I select a bunch of cells, again, I click in the middle of a cell and I just drag my mouse. And when I let go, all of those cells are selected. If I click all borders, then it's going to fill in every single border for all of those cells that I had selected. I'll do no border for that again. And then I'll do outside borders. So it just gives me the outside of the selection, or it gives me the outside of one cell if I only have one cell selected. There's thick outside borders, which is exactly what it sounds like, a little bit thicker box here. And then there are some other additional options: bottom double border, thick bottom border, top and bottom border, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can really go nuts with the borders here. Now, the reason for this is two things. You might want this as two things. Number one, it's useful sometimes to highlight visually particular cells that you want to draw the attention of future you, or of someone that who might be looking at your workbook in the future. So, if you have a total, a cell with a total in it, it might be nice to put a border around it so that people notice it a little better. Or if you have a particular place that you want people to put data, it might be nice to put a border around that, so on and so forth. There's a bunch of different things that you could do there. If you have if you have the other thing is, if you're planning on printing, by default, the grid lines in Excel don't show up when you print. And that's just because they're sort of meant to be there, but not necessarily all that visible. So if you want the grid lines to show up, one way to do it is to select the cells that you want grid lines to show up for. Click on like all borders or something. And then when you print it out, these will appear. Otherwise, you just kind of have 542 and 2 and the word text hanging out in space on your page, basically, which is not the worst thing in the world, but it might not be great for readability depending on what you're trying to do. If I click this drop down arrow again, I'll click no border just to get rid of all those. But that's something that's worth mentioning. So let's see. So we've got all that. We've talked about borders. And of course, again, just like with the other buttons we talked about with the colors and underlining, whichever option you click here becomes the default. So that if you click the button, that's the thing that it will do. And to get to something else, you click the drop down arrow and select it from the menu here. Okay, so let's talk about resizing and selecting multiple cells. So first, let's talk about resizing our columns and rows. The way that we do this is pretty simple. All you need to do, let's say, for example, I wanted to get this column H a little bit wider. I'm going to come up here to the top, and I'm going to move my mouse onto the borderline between columns H and I. You'll notice that my mouse pointer turns into a black solid line with 2 black arrows pointing left and right. When I click and hold, then I can move that borderline a little bit and it'll show me how wide it is. 15 units of width, I guess, or 110 pixels. I'm going to let go of the mouse button, and now I get a wider column here. Another thing that I can do if I want my column to sort of stretch or shrink to match the width of the information that's in here, this is super duper handy. All I need to do, let's say I want to make column E only really wide enough to accommodate the word text here, which is the widest thing in that column. I'm going to come up here to the top, move my mouse to the right and on that borderline between columns E and F, double click, and then that narrows the column until I get until it's just wide enough to accommodate the word text with just a little bit of padding there for the sake of readability to not make it look too cramped, basically. If I had something longer though, then I could double click here and it'll actually widen the column out. It moves to accommodate whatever the widest thing is in that particular column, and that's really handy. One other option that you have is to right click on a column letter, and you can do all of this with rows as well. You just move to the borderline between the row numbers. But I'll right click on the column letter, click where it says column width, and then right now I have 3.86 units wide. I could change it to say 15, click OK, and now the column widens out to that particular width. That's really useful for changing multiple columns. So I'm gonna look and see. Okay, 8.43 seems to be the default here. So I'm actually gonna click on this column. And then I'm going to select multiple columns. To do that, I'll hold down on the column letter up at the top or near it. And I'm going to move my mouse over until I get all the columns selected that I want to change. And now all of these columns all the way down to row 100,000 and whatever, however far down this sheet goes, all of the cells in those columns are selected. I'm going to right click up here at the top on one of these column letters, click column width, and I'm going to go 8.43. Whoops. And click OK. And now I have and now I have columns of even width, 8.43 units wide for all of them. I really don't know what those units are supposed to be, but it's not particularly critical that it's 8.43 whatever's wide. Okay, so over here, again, on the left, I can do the same thing with my column numbers. So if I want this column to be taller, I'll move down to this borderline between 4 and 5, hold down with my mouse button and drag down till I get this column height right here. I'm going to undo that. Okay, cool. So last thing that I want to talk about here on this sandbox sheet before we move to our other example is I want to talk about number formatting here. That's a little bit of computer jargon, so let me back up and explain what I mean when I say formatting. In computer world, when we talk about formatting, what we mean is changing the look or layout of something without changing the content of it. So, for example, some formatting that I did here in cell H7 is I turned on the wrap text function. The text that's stored in cell H7 hasn't changed. It still says this text is somewhat longer, but rather than it going out here into these other columns or getting cut off at the borderline between columns H and I, instead, what it does is it wraps the text around and allows it to all fit on multiple lines inside the row. So that's an example of formatting. Another example would be changing the color of the font here, changing the font size, changing the fill color of the cell, things like that. All of those things are examples of formatting. But we also have in Excel what's called number formatting, and that's kind of a special case. Let me actually move down here a little ways, just get out of the way of some of this stuff, and we'll play with number formatting a little. Okay, so I've got a little bit more room to play around here. Let's say that I'm keeping track of a budget. And so I'm watching my expenditures. I'm going to type them all into my my Excel sheet here. So let's say I spent $5 yesterday on coffee or whatever, and I paid $83.50 for the, I don't know, internet bill, and I paid $112.35 at the grocery store, and then I spent $8 paying my buddy back for lunch, and let's see, and then $42 on movie and popcorn. Okay, great, all set. We're good to go. Got the big popcorn, obviously. So what I did kind of an intentionally bad job at making this look consistent. So all of these are supposed to be dollar amounts, right? But I've got $5 up here, but it's just a 5. I've got 83.5 for $83.50. I've got 112.35. There's still no dollar sign here. I used a dollar sign on $8 down there. There's no decimal and there's no zeros or anything. And then I've got $42, just another unsigned, no decimal number, like is up here in column or in on row 19 or 18, I guess. So what I want to do is change this so that all this is consistent. I'm going to do that by clicking clicking column R up here at the top to select the whole thing. Got it selected. And then I'm going to come up here where it says General, click on the drop-down box, and I'm going to click on Currency. And that's going to change all of this so that it matches up. So I've got now $5 decimal point 00, $83 decimal point 50, et cetera, et cetera. So it all looks the same. And if I add another number down here, 1123, then it automatically formats it. It adds that dollar sign to it in that case. Or if I go, 8 again, then I've got $8 right away. So that's really, really handy. That way I don't have to worry about making it look just right and fiddling around with it. It's just it just works pretty much. So so that's what number formatting does. It doesn't change what I've typed in, but it does kind of put a little mask on it to make it look the way that I expect it to look and to make everything consistent with each other. If the number formatting is the same and you put in approximately the same kind of data, then it should come out the same. So let's say I want to add dates to these transactions. There we go. Okay, I've got a few dates in there. I'm not going to invent dates for all of these rows, but you'll notice Excel did kind of recognize these as dates when I typed them in. By default, if it recognizes a date, unless it has this format of month, day, or month/day/year, it will actually convert it into something like this. So essentially the day number in the month dash and then a 3-letter representation of the name of the month. And I don't care for this format, but I'm sure, maybe it's a standard in accounting or something like that. I'm not sure, but anyway, that's the format that Excel seems to like, and it converts a lot of dates into this format. But I want it to all be something like this. And you'll notice also, by the way, I typed in month/day/ and then a 4-digit year. And here I typed in a 2-digit year, and it formatted those the same way as well. I want all of it to be this number format. So what I'm going to do is come up here again. I'm going to select column Q. I'm going to go up to the drop down where it says general, and I'm going to change that to short date. And then it again gives me these dates in that format. And anything I type in that Excel recognizes that could be a date, then it's going to convert it to be represented in this way. And that's really, really cool. Another option that I have is to convert it to long date. So it's going to take all these just month/day/year, and it's actually going to write it out. Friday, April 23rd, 2021. By the way, if you don't put in a year, it's going to assume it's this year. Even if you're doing it on December 31st, it's going to assume that it's that date in whatever the calendar year is. So this is another way I can convert the dates without having to worry about exactly, or, without writing everything in exactly the way that I would expect. In fact, if I go in here and I go, 9/10, then again, it gives me Friday, September 10th, 2021. Pretty cool. You have a bunch of other number formats. There's the accounting format, which is really similar to the currency. The only difference is it places the currency symbol over here on the left, and it lines up the decimal points exactly so that you can really easily go through and sort of do mental math going down the rows if you need to and read what all the numbers are. If I'm trying to add things mentally here, like the dollar sign, particularly in some of these shorter numbers, is probably going to throw me a little. So that's the accounting format. There's the time format for time values, obviously. There's the percentage. There's fractions. There's scientific notation. And there's text, which basically represents the number, or which turns it into specifically text information. Even if it's a number, technically, Excel treats it as text for humans rather than a number that it can do math on. So you want to be careful with that. It also, changing a cell to the text format disables formulas. So you want to be really careful with that. There's also just a plain number format. And what that's going to do is turn all your numbers into a number plus 2 decimal places. And then general, no specific format. It'll just kind of try to make it look the best that it can. By the way, if I convert these numbers here in column Q, or these dates here in column Q, to the number format, you'll see something interesting. Excel will take these numbers and will take those dates and it'll convert them into a serial number. You'll notice all the serial numbers start with 44,000. What this actually does is this is how Excel really sees these dates. Whenever you put a date or even a time value in Excel, what it does is it essentially it calculates or it stores it as a serial number that counts from midnight on January 1st, 1900 to whatever the thing is. So, for example, here, this is September 10th, 2021. September 10th, 2021 was the 44,449th day from January 1st, 1900. So I show you that because it's kind of interesting, but also because since this is the way that Excel deals with dates, you can add and subtract dates just like you would any other number in all of Excel. So if I take today's date, or if I take the date of Christmas this year and subtract today's date from it, then it's going to give me a numerical value that's the number of days from now until Christmas. So that's pretty handy, and we'll deal with that a little bit next week. I just wanted to show you that. All right, so I'm going to click the basic math sheet down here at the bottom, and let's go ahead and shift gears. Give me just a sec. Let me sort out one thing really quickly, and I'll be right back, and we'll dig into these, what we're going to do with these numbers. It's going to be pretty cool. Now we're getting really to the heart of things now that you know the basics. All right, I'm back. Thanks so much for hanging on. So let's dive into this. On this basic math sheet, we're going to do several different things. But we're going to start out, let's start out by setting the stage with our little example. Here on this sheet, what we've got is a bunch of people's names, a bunch of dates, an income number, and an expenses number for each person. And in this particular example, I've got a little side business. To be honest, it's not going so well. I've got a lot of salespeople, but they're not really bringing in a whole lot of money, and they're spending a fair bit of money in the process. It's been going for about 10 years now, and it's not great. So what I want to do with this is I want to try and understand my situation with this fake side business a little bit better. In order to do that, first of all, I just need to be able to find information because right now, this all seems to be in random order. So I want to sort this out a little bit. To do that, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click in the midst of the data here, just on one of these cells with a number or a date or a name. I'm going to click somewhere in there. Make sure you don't have this top left cell selected like it starts out, because it's not going to work. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the top and I'm going to find this button that says sort and filter. And I'll move over that button, click on it, and I'm going to click filter. What Excel will do is it will look at the data that I've got there, and it will say, okay, it looks like we've got a bunch of stuff around here. We've got basically 4 columns worth of data. So there's a name header, a date header, an income header, and an expenses header. And next to each of those headers, it's got a little drop-down arrow that tells allows us to deal with the information that's in that column, like so. First, I'm going to come up here to the name column, click the drop-down arrow next to it, and I'm going to click Sort A to Z. When I do that, I'll get all my data in alphabetical order. Antoinette first, and Zeke down here at the bottom, A to Z. I can sort by date. So if I click oldest to newest, these, by the way, are supposed to represent the dates that people last checked in with me, my salespeople. So this person, it was over 10 years ago, not looking so good for that. So I might need to check in on Rapali a little bit and see how things are going for him, do a little wellness check. But his date's the earliest, 4/14/2011, and then Antoinette's date is the latest, 11/1/2021. That's today. So I've got all of that. So I've got that sorted out. And of course, I could do it the opposite way. If I click on the drop down arrow and I go newest to oldest, then Antoinette's going to show up here and Rapali's down at the bottom now. I could sort by income number. Let's see. Sort largest to smallest. Our top earner is Zeke here with a lot of income and very little expenses too. Interesting. And similarly, if I sort smallest to largest over here, Johnny is the person who's incurred the least expenses overall. And Rupali has incurred the most expenses. So not so good. But I can use this to quickly get to information. If I want to just be able to quickly find someone's numbers, then I can sort alphabetically. And that way I can just go down the list and say, okay, I'm looking for Oliver's information. And there it is, lo and behold, on this row. Great. So that is the sorting. You can also filter. So let's say I only want to check the people who have checked in with me relatively recently. So I'm going to come up here to this date drop-down box, and I'm going to click on that. And down here underneath I'll see a bunch of little check boxes here. I've got, and each of these is a year. Let's say I only want to see dates from mid 2019 onward. So I'm gonna uncheck the box next to select all, and that's gonna deselect all of these different years. I'm gonna select 2021 and 2020. And then for 2019, I'm gonna click the plus sign next to it, and I'm gonna see, okay, all right, turns out that the only dates here where there's a November and there's a December. So I could check those. If I only wanted to see the December ones and not the November ones, I could uncheck November. There we go. So anything from December 2019 onward is going to show up, and anything earlier than that is not going to show up because it's unchecked. I'll click OK. And that filters out some of the data here. So I still have the data. You'll notice that my row numbers actually skip here. But the data that I don't need at this moment is filtered out, so I can focus on the data that I do need and really zero in on these people who are currently active, more or less. So that's sort and filter. You also have, if I need to get the data back and be able to see everything, I can click here and click clear filter from date, or I can come up here where it says sort and filter and click clear in that menu. And that'll clear all the filters if there's more than one. I can also click sort and filter up here and click custom sort, where I can basically add multiple levels. So I could sort based on the name, A to Z. And then if there's a tie, if it's the same name, I could sort based on income and go largest to smallest. I'll click OK. And now you'll notice there's 3 Johns, and they're all together because we're sorted alphabetically. But the people with the largest income, the John with the largest income number is on top. Second largest is below that. Third largest is below that. So that way I can sort things exactly the way I need them to be and keep it consistent if I'm sorting things, if I'm sorting different sets of data and maybe comparing them. Okay, cool. So I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to sort largest to smallest on just the income. And let's do a little formula here. So we're not going to dig too deep into formulas because we're going to save some of that for next week. But I do want you to get a taste for it because it's actually not as complicated as it looks and not as scary as it looks. So I'm going to make sure that that you see a little bit of it. And then when we come back next week, we'll be able to dig in a little more deeply. So let's write a formula. Formulas are basically designed to calculate information based on the information that you give them, so that you don't have to do the math yourself manually and you're less likely to make mistakes. And it just automates things, which is really nice. Let's say that over here in cell F4, let's say that I always sort it this data based on the income number. And let's say over here in cell F4, I want to show the top salesperson's name. Well, if I'm sorting based on income and I'm putting the largest income number on top, then whoever has the largest income number at this point is going to show, their name's going to show up in cell A4. So what I can do in order to get their name in this cell, I'm going to come up, I'm going to click on the cell or use the arrow keys to move to it. And I'm going to come up here to the top in the formula bar and click there. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that. That's not required. But usually when I write a formula, I do click in the formula bar there. The reason being, it's a lot easier to correct your mistakes. Sometimes if you're typing in a cell and you use the little arrow keys to kind of go back and correct things, then it will actually move your selection to a different cell depending on certain circumstances, which, to be honest, are a little unclear. But if you're working with, but as long as you are, as long as you keep, but if you're working in the formula bar, it's a lot easier to go back and correct mistakes when you make them. I say when you make them because, again, we're all human and we all make mistakes. So you're going to make mistakes, and it's good to be kind to yourself upon the occasion that you do. So I'm going to click in the formula bar and I'm going to hit the equal sign. The equal sign tells Excel to expect a formula. If you type something in a cell and you start out with the equal sign, then Excel is going to assume it's a formula. So you have to start every formula with an equal sign. Conversely, if you start something with an equal sign, but it's not supposed to be a formula, Excel is going to treat it like it's a formula, and that could be a problem. So always start a formula with an equal sign. Never start anything else with an equal sign. Then I'm going to type then I'm going to type after the equal sign A4. There we go. You'll notice A4 is color-coded in blue up here, and I actually get cell A4 color-coded in blue as well, so that I know that I'm pointing my formula to the right cell. I'll click the check mark up here or press enter, which is what I normally do. And lo and behold, cell F4 says Zeke, and it says that over here in A4, because this is essentially mimicking whatever's in A4. What this formula does is it says, hey, look over there in cell A4. Whatever it says, I want to say that too. And so if I change this to, say, Zach, and press enter, then it's going to change F4 to Zach as well. Pretty cool. So you've now written your first formula. Congratulations. You did it. It wasn't that bad. Let's do one more. This one's a little more complex, and this will set the stage for next week's class really well. So I'm going to click here in cell C2 underneath where it says total income. And guess what? We're going to calculate the total of all these income numbers in that cell. So I'm going to click here, press the equal sign, and then I'm going to start typing the rest of my formula. So I'm going to type the word sum, S-U-M, not sum as in some chicken, so it's sum as in the answer to an addition problem, S-U-M. And I'm going to open a set of parentheses. So I'm going to hold shift while pressing 9. Then I'm going to type into this, then I'm going to type into the parentheses here, C4 colon C100. And here's what this does. So when I type C4 colon C100, the colon with two different with two different cell addresses next to it tells Excel this is a range of cells. When I say a range of cells, what I mean is a group of cells that you can select just by holding down in one and dragging, or a group of cells that forms a line or a rectangle with no gaps. So in this case, it forms a line from cell C4 up here at the top down to cell C100 down here at the bottom. Some of that's empty, but if I were to add extra salespeople, extra rows of data down here, and we had more income numbers, writing the formula this way allows me to just have those new income numbers automatically added to the total without me having to rewrite my formula, and that's really handy. So I've got C4 colon C100. Then I'm going to hold shift and press 0 to close my parentheses. Whenever you have a left parenthesis, you got to have a right parenthesis. Then I'm going to press enter on my keyboard, and $28,727.68. That's the total of all these income numbers. If I add, say 2,000 here, then I get up to $30,727.68. So what this formula does, the sum right here, this is what we call a function, which I mentioned earlier. Functions are tricks that Excel already knows how to do. So you're saying Excel add, um, and then inside the parentheses of the function, you have to give it some information to work with. So in this case, we gave it a range of cells, the range C4 to C100. It adds those numbers together and it gives you the total. And we're going to dig into more into what that means next week. That's pretty much it. What questions do y'all have for me before we wrap it up? Just go ahead and shout those out in comments or in chat, and we'll tackle those before we close things out for today. All right. Okay, great. Yep, there is one question. That's a pretty easy one. Misty on Facebook asks, "What day is the next class?" And the next class is going to be a week from today on Monday. We're gonna try to start right at 10 o'clock. And so yeah, feel free to join us then. And we'll dig into part two, which is going to cover some additional formulas, and we're also going to talk about how to create charts in Excel, which is really cool and useful. All right, I don't see anything else just yet. If you do have additional questions between now and next week, feel free to shoot me an email. The email address is nsmith@cals.org. Feel free again to download those example files, or the example file, excuse me, and the handout, and practice with those if you want. You'll be able to find the recorded version of this video for a while. In fact, it'll be on it, or some version of it will be on YouTube and Facebook pretty much forever. Um, on Twitch, of course, the VODs are going to expire after 2 weeks, but you'll have time. And I hope that y'all have a fantastic rest of the day. Thank you so much for joining me.